unpack this. We have an absolutely fascinating deep dive today, custom tailored for you, and it's focused on one of the most sought after and frankly least understood human qualities,
Yeah.
wisdom. And we are going far beyond just, simple intelligence. This isn't about your IQ or how many books you've read.
Right.
We're exploring that critical distinction between knowing things, just having the data, and knowing how to use that information. Where does that judgment actually come from?
Mm-hmm.
So our mission today is to really break down this concept from its ancient origins all the way to the surprising source of true intuitive insight using all the great material you shared with us.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the material gives us a really strong starting point. It uses a specific historical archetype, the wise men from the Gospel of Matthew.
Okay.
And this isn't just a religious reference. It really serves as a template for what the ancient world considered wise and lets us analyze the traits that go way beyond just book smarts.
So we'll start with that ancient template.
Exactly. We'll start there, then define how practical wisdom develops, and finally we'll get into the core argument of the sources, that the truest wisdom, well, it comes from a spiritual or intuitive place, not just, calculation.
Let's start there then. With that original template, why were those visitors from the East called wise men? The research notes the original Greek term was magoi.
That term, Magi, is crucial. It immediately tells you these weren't just some random travelers. The Magi were the absolute intellectual elite of their day.
The elite. In what way?
They were highly educated scholars, but also astrologers, priests, probably from Persia or Babylon. They were interpreters of dreams, genuine experts in astronomy and sacred texts. They had profound theoretical knowledge.
So they were experts, masters of information, but that, by itself, that doesn't equal wisdom, right?
Not at all. And what's fascinating here is that the sources point to specific actions that define their wisdom, not just what they knew.
Okay, like what?
First, they had this incredible ability to read signs. They saw the Star of Bethlehem, not just as a star, but as a cosmological sign of a major royal birth. Yeah. That ability to interpret complexity was key.
So foresight.
Foresight, exactly. And secondly, they showed immense openness and humility. I mean, think about it. They were willing to travel hundreds of miles to seek a newborn king far outside their own culture, their own comfort zone.
Right, they were seeking a truth that wasn't their own.
And that takes humility. And then their discernment was so clear in their offerings. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Those weren't just random expensive gifts.
No, they were symbolic. They represented royalty, divinity, and mortality. They saw the deep meaning in what, to others, might have seemed like a very humble situation.
Exactly. That's judgment. That's honor.
So if we take those traits, insight, humility, discernment, how do we kind of distill that into a modern definition of wisdom?
Well, drawing from those, a simple definition would be, wisdom is the ability to use your knowledge, your experience, and your good judgment to select the best options for your opinions, your words, and your actions.
I love the analogy the material uses to separate knowledge from wisdom.
The one about the dog.
Yeah. So knowledge is having the information. You know the dog behind that fence is vicious.
You have the fact.
You have the fact. But wisdom is knowing how to use that fact. It's choosing not to rattle the fence, to just walk a different way and avoid the conflict altogether. It's the choice of action.
And that wisdom isn't something you're born with. It's developed through reflection, through really observing the outcomes of your decisions and, maybe more importantly, the decisions of others.
So it sounds like wisdom is really about becoming a master of pattern recognition.
That's exactly right. Good judgment is molded by experience. It lets you see these repeating patterns in life or in people that others they don't see until it's way too late.
And humility is key to that.
It's the grease on the wheels. Humility lets us admit we don't know everything, which makes us open to learning. Pride, on the other hand, is the enemy of wisdom. Pride always has to be right, always has to be speaking.
Whereas wisdom is often found in listening more and speaking less. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The wise aren't just passive observers. They're incredibly active in their internal thinking.
That internal process is everything.
Yeah.
The sources highlight 4 key actions of a wise person's thought process.
Okay.
First, they look for the root cause, not just the symptom. Second, they think before acting.
Yeah.
Third, they try to perceive other people's real motives, not just what they say.
And the fourth?
They distinguish what truly matters from what's just, distracting noise. It's deliberation. A wise person only acts or speaks after really considering the impact on everyone involved. But this raises an important question, and this is where it gets complex. If you're wise, does that mean you're wise about everything.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? Like it's a switch you just flip on.
But the sources argue no, strongly no. Wisdom is often compartmentalized.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think of the example from the research. You can have a person who is incredibly wise professionally, a brilliant CEO, a respected judge. People go to them for advice.
Sure.
But that same person goes home, and they are completely unwise in how they handle their marriage or how they relate to their children emotionally. Their wisdom doesn't translate.
So wisdom isn't a universal trait. It's context dependent.
It is. It's a constant process of adapting. And we even see this with the original Magi. They had the wisdom to make the journey, but then they just went home. They sort of failed to recognize their larger mission, which was arguably to protect the child. Their wisdom had a boundary.
So true wisdom means being conscious that the formula that works in your career might be the absolute wrong formula for your family life.
Exactly. And this brings us to that core distinction between cleverness and wisdom. A clever person can be brilliant at manipulating things to get what they want right now.
But a wise person is
What?
morally insightful.
Yes. They're morally insightful. They don't just know what works. They intuitively know and choose what is right for the long term.
And that intuitive knowing, that's the big mystery, isn't it? Where does that sense of rightness actually come from?
Well, for many, wisdom is purely logical. We can call this practical wisdom, and it's driven by the intellectual brain.
This is the pro and con list person.
Precisely. They manage their whole life through intellectual analysis. They list pros and cons, apply weighting percentages, and select the calculated best option.
And this kind of wisdom is often built on mistakes, right? You mess up, you regret it, and you make a rule. I'll never do that again.
Yes, but that's the critical flaw of relying only on practical wisdom. People make the same mistakes over and over again, even when they have a rule against it,
Why is that?
because they fail to see that the underlying cause within themselves hasn't changed. They address the external symptom, but not the internal root.
They have the knowledge, but not the wisdom to change the impulse.
Exactly. And the research breaks this down into two categories of mistakes. Category A is when you're fully aware that an action is a mistake, but you do it anyway.
We all know this one. It's that moment of self-sabotage. You know you need to save money, but you buy the thing anyway. You know you need to stop the bad habit, but tomorrow comes and you're right back there.
Right. The source uses addiction as a stark example, but it applies to any ingrained habit, what they call a propensity. That inner impulse is just stronger than your intellectual decision not to do it.
Okay, so what's category B?
Category B is when you're genuinely unaware it's a mistake until you see it in hindsight. We look back and say, oh, if only I'd taken that other job.
We regret the path we took.
We do. But here's the sharp insight from the research. We rarely stop to consider if the other path, the one we now idealize, might have actually had a more negative outcome.
We just assume the grass was greener. It's an intellectual trap.
It is. And this brings us back to the source of guidance that operates outside that kind of calculation. The research suggests that true wisdom comes from the spirit, from the very core of the human being.
An inherent knowing.
An inherent knowing. This spiritual wisdom sees everything from the perspective of, well, what the sources call the laws of creation. It knows that failing to align with these fundamental laws will inevitably lead to suffering.
And this isn't a calculation. It doesn't arrive as a spreadsheet in your head.
No, it often comes as a flash of realization, a gut feeling, an undeniable knowing that just bypasses all the rational thought. It comes from our intuitive brain, not the intellectual one.
So if this is always available, why aren't we hearing it all the time?
Because of the noise. The sources say we're only open to these insights when we're not consumed by the chatter in our busy brains, in that quiet space between thoughts.
And when does that happen?
It can happen in dreams or right when you wake up in meditation. Or, and the sources stress this, it happens when you're distraught, when you're suffering, when you've hit bottom.
When your own intellectual strategies have totally failed you.
That's when you're finally quiet enough to hear it. And if you listen to that clear inner directive, even if it seems illogical, and you act on it, you can overcome almost any of those deep-seated propensities.
But we have free will. We can ignore it.
We have unbridled free will. Our rational mind can easily dismiss it as impractical or too hard.
But we still have to face the consequences.
We are always bound to the consequences, favorable or not. And if they're unfavorable, we suffer. And this is where that profound refrain comes in.
That suffering isn't a punishment.
Exactly. The sources describe suffering as a necessary feedback loop. a gift of love, if you will, from the Creator. It's a painful but undeniable signal that allows us to recognize our decisions have violated a universal principle.
So the suffering itself is a tool to redirect us. It's the universe saying, hey, your intellectual formula failed you. Now pay attention to your intuition.
It's the ultimate learning mechanism, yes.
So ultimately, the definition of the truly wise person, according to this material, is someone who strives to be spiritually wise. Someone who bridges their analytical mind with that core intuitive knowing.
Yes, they keep that channel open.
And I think the final observation from the research is so crucial. We assume wisdom just comes with getting older.
And it often doesn't. We all know older people who are not wise at all, and some young people who just seem to have been born with it. It's not about how many years you've lived, it's about that internal alignment. We've seen how much what we call wisdom is really about recognizing patterns in the world, and most importantly, within yourself, and connecting that to an intuitive sense of rightness.
The mind is the tool, but the spirit is the source of truth.
And that idea that suffering is actually a necessary gift, a feedback loop designed to bring us back into alignment, that's a huge reframe for how we view challenges in our own lives. Failure is instruction.
If you choose to see it that way.
So we'll leave you with this provocative thought. If you look back at the last significant internal struggle you had, where you repeated a mistake you knew you shouldn't make, was the underlying cause really the external circumstances? Or was it a repeating propensity within yourself that you failed to recognize because you dismissed that first quiet flash of intuitive wisdom?
Understanding that difference, that's the key. That's moving from just repeating a pattern to actually learning a lesson.